Cecily, thank you so much. And John Huber, thank you for the invite. I appreciate everybody participating in this conference. Before I talk a little bit about the company, I do think there's an opportunity here in this transition for everybody who's in the business. And although I think there's an initial knee jerk where we're talking about heat pumps and electricity, I think there's a place and a role for liquid fuels to actually lower the carbon footprint of the industry and to sort of lead the charge in changing what our greenhouse gases emissions are, right? So there is an opportunity here, but I think the key very broadly is we've got to embrace the change, become involved, and lead, right? And utilities, particularly electric utilities, are in the U.S. in particular are quasi public-private partnerships, right? And what do I mean by that? They're important enough that the state and government takes a role in what they do and how they deliver their services. But yet they're also driven in part by profit, right? But on top of that may sit regulation that is being pushed, right, to change the emission profile. So they have a natural, what I would say, in with all these regulatory bodies. And they're also by their nature very political because their boards in part are chosen by the governments that are involved with them. So we have our work cut out for us as a fuel industry to make sure that our voice is heard and that what we can offer is also heard throughout not only the environmental community, but through the regulatory authorities as well. So with that, I'd like to just sort of go to the next page, click over to 2, and I'll talk a little bit about what Global does. You can move to the next page from there. So, our business, although we're not a producer today of products, we essentially buy products at the refinery gate, and then we put them on barges, ships, pipeline, rail, and then we put them into our storage facilities, and then we break that bulk and put it out into wholesale, commercial, and retail sectors as well. Turn to the next page, please. So just a broad overview, 21 petroleum bulk product terminals. We move about 421,000 barrels a day of petroleum products and crude oil. We have 283 company-operated convenience stores, 9.9 million barrels of storage capacity, over 1,500 gas stations that are owned, leased, and supplied, and approximately 3,400 employees. I want to talk a little bit about the barrels of storage capacity. So if you asked me 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and the reason I've been in this business so long, it's a family business, but what we carry and what we sell today are entirely different products than what we carried and sold a decade ago or even longer, right? So not only are we in the gasoline distribution business, not only are we in the heating oil distribution business and the gasoline distribution business, but also in the transportation sector as it relates to ships, but also ethanol and biofuel, right? And we have rail capacity in our terminals, and in the U.S., not only are you importing cargoes in of products, but you're also moving by rail as well. And so I'd say these changes, once again, they all present opportunities, right? And I think change is good. I have typically found regulation provides opportunity. You've just got to embrace what that opportunity is and lead the charge and not be afraid to push towards those changes. So go to the next slide. So we have taken a little bit of a different view than I'd say certainly the financial sectors in the business, but as an operating entity, we're a believer in essentially having that supply and trading component, marrying that supply and trading component to our logistics, but also then creating this integrated marketing model where we can actually pull that demand all the way through our entire system. And so that means essentially buying in bulk, buying every product in bulk, and then putting it in through our terminal and operational systems, and then delivering it all the way down into the consumer's tanks. And there's all various slices of that business that go along. Next slide. Next slide from there. So a little bit on the regulatory impacts. Clearly there's a movement to low carbon fuels. There's lots of proposals taking place. But one of the keys here? The keys are it's not just federal, it's not just state, and it's not just local. It's every part of government is taking a position on how this should get rolled out, because there's I'd say disparate feelings about how quickly this needs to happen, and then what is the best way for this to happen. So once again, I actually think that that's going to provide us with an opportunity as long as our voice is heard, and as long as we can be somewhat competitive to the alternatives. But people need to understand, or governments need to understand, that we can provide better value, a lower carbon footprint than other alternatives that are out there. Turn to the next slide. And John Huber talked a little bit about this, but in 2005, Clean Air Act was amended to include renewable fuel standard. As you sort of move forward, it's increasing amounts of renewable fuels are being required to put into the markets. I'd say one of the things that's taking place and that is changing is not only the support at the federal level for replacing RFS, but a change to a low carbon fuel standard. That's being led by California. We have terminal operations out in Oregon on the West Coast, just next to California. And we were moving ethanol through that facility for the last 5 or 6 years for multiple parties. That ethanol was then being exported to Asia. And we recently signed an agreement with a renewable diesel producer to go through that facility. And I'm sure those of you who pay attention, have seen multiple announcements with renewable diesel projects out on the West Coast. And this is really being inspired and essentially subsidized or paid for by the low carbon fuel standard that exists in California. And so we're looking at our terminal network and we're saying, okay, well, where else can we do that, right? Where else can we take renewable diesel and put it in to our facility? And I would say for the moment, I don't see that on the East Coast or regionally throughout the Northeast until there is a different standard demanding or requiring that renewable diesel be consumed into the marketplace, right? So most of those products now are facing west. That's where all the projects that are getting built and the logistics are being set up. But I think over time, as a low carbon renewable fuel standard comes into existence in the East Coast, you'll then begin to see other projects get built around that, and that will then face the East Coast as well. So turning next to the next slide. So here it is basically just saying, look, the start is out on the West Coast, as it seems to be in the US in many ways. But let's not kid ourselves. They're spending a lot of money to put that renewable diesel into the marketplace, and but it is reducing carbon footprint. It is renewable in the way that it is being subsidized. And so at the end of the day, I do see this occurring and growing throughout the country over time. Next slide. States taking aggressive actions to reduce these emissions. Once again, John walked us through this, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but the bottom line is this is where we're heading. I think the goal should be for us as an industry to take an active role to make sure that we have a seat at the table, to make sure that we're presenting opportunities to lower our emissions throughout the country, and to have a role in what that liquid distribution system is going to look like moving forward. Next slide. The election is going to change what the outlook really moves towards and how quickly it moves towards that. So at the end of the day, it's interesting, right? Because the political situation has become so separate that one of the things, if you sign on to the new Green Deal, is you can't take money for oil companies, right? And so that's problematic for us, because at the end of the day, I've got 1,500 locations from Virginia to Maine, gas stations, convenience stores that I supply, that I own, that I lease. I actually think we have a big role in, if it ends up being electric, we have the best locations. We already have all the assets and facilities to provide convenience for that traveler. So I actually think that there's a natural bias for us to deliver electricity to those cars. So there's a role there. Have we been shut out? Not completely, but we've definitely been stigmatized. And I think we're going to be an important part of that transition as it takes place. We just need to make sure, once again, that we're being heard at the political and legislative level, so that we can have a role and say, hey, let's raise our hand. We've got a big position in this, and we can actually make it happen easier and facilitate with the manufacturers who today are essentially subsidizing those build out of those systems, right? And then when we talk a little bit about on the House climate proposals, once again, we have a role in low carbon fuels. Let's make sure that we're heard and we're part of that transition. Next slide. So coalition building, working together in industry. I think that's what we're trying to do here. But it's making sure that that very locally, because it's being done not just at the federal and state level, but at the local level, that we're heard and that we're involved, that we get the message out, right? So, public communications is really critical here. And unfortunately, we're going to be fighting this not on a national level, but an on the ground level. And that means not only federally, but state by state. And we have a role to play. We've just got to make sure that as an industry, and whether that is the automobile industry or the home heating oil industry, that we're putting these businesses together, because they're all going to get affected in a form. And so, and I think because we should coalesce around this concept of liquid fuel delivery system, that means industries that haven't necessarily connected together because they haven't thought their issues are the same, actually at the highest level are the exact same, right? And so we've got to make sure that we're all involved and we're driving that across all the businesses for liquid fuel delivery systems. To the next slide. And so, what is global doing? I mean, look, this is, we're about helping the environment, and we're about making money, right? And if we don't make money, we can't help the environment. So I do think this is an opportunity for all of us to play a role in. We've got to push forward with it, and that's really the goal here, right?